With the release of Deltarune Chapter 5, I've never wanted to talk about a video game more. If you haven't played Chapter 5 yet, do it. Right now. And if you haven't played Deltarune before, watch this video, I guess. Maybe it will convince you to play it. I love everything about this game. The story, the characters, the boss fights, the music, the lore, the jokes, the music, the writing, the music. And there's one aspect of Deltarune that excels in all of these places. The secret boss fights. Or the Shadow Crystal fights, or the super boss fights, whatever you want to call them. Now that we've presumably faced the last one of these in Chapter 5, it made me look at the entire collection as a whole. And it's safe to say that this is an interesting group at the very least. Back when Chapter 1 and 2 were the only chapters released, it was really easy to draw a lot of parallels between the bosses. They both had thematic connections to freedom, they both were hidden and out of the way, both of their theme names were in all capitals, and they both used the fan-dubbed freedom motif. It seemed like all of the bosses were going to use a unique soul mode, and that they would all have connections to the mystery man himself, Gaster. But after the release of Chapters 3 and 4, basically all of that was thrown out the window. And now with Chapter 5's release, things haven't gotten any better. Any connections I've seen people make are at best a stretch and at worst actively untrue. Yes, every secret boss has at least a loose connection to freedom, but Queen wants Lightners to be free from their problems, Flowery is trying to convince Ralsei to be like him and be free to be who he wants to, King wants to free his subjects from the Lightners, and Starwalker wants to be free to be the original. If you stretch it enough, anyone can be connected to freedom. Basically, the only thing that stayed consistent is the need for a key of some kind to access them. But I kept coming back to something. Throughout the pink boss fight, there are quite a few parallels to Kris and the player. This is obviously meant to make us look at our relationship with Kris and see how our own wants are harming them and vice versa. Yet we both still need each other. That's pretty interesting, and it reminded me of the Spamton fight and all of its parallels to Kris, trying to break free of the chains that hold them, but knowing that those same chains are keeping them held up. It's kinda weird that two of the secret bosses have such an explicit parallel to the playable character of the game. Huh. I was then hit by 30 idea bombs at the same time. Yeah, I think that the parallels that can be drawn between all of the secret bosses is not freedom or a certain motif. It's Kris, and their direct parallels to them. Not convinced? I wasn't at first either, but the deeper I dug into this, the more interesting this became. Through these parallels, we can potentially learn more about Kris's character, motivation, and potentially the future plot of Deltarune. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into... Jevil isn't exactly a very deep character, he's just a simple chaos. Unfortunately, he has the least amount of screen time out of any of the main secret bosses, unless you got stuck on him for multiple days like one of my friends did. His entire character boils down to crazy clown that learned too much about his world and tried to kill people. Not to say he's bad, I like Jevil. It's just hard to find any parallels to Kris at first glance. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. Kris was apparently a bit of a prankster before we took control of them. To a much stronger degree, Jevil is as well. This parallel was strengthened in Chapter 5 with the introduction of Aqua. Aqua is very similar to Kris in a lot of ways, to the point that I now believe that Kris is the Cyan Soul from Undertale, except alive and in the world of Deltarune. As Aqua puts so eloquently,
Blue, 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 we are knife friends in blue.
Aqua's chaotic nature seems to be very similar to a young Kris as well. She has black hair that covers her eyes, and her eyes are red. Seems like a lot of Kris references to me. But you know who else Aqua references? Jevil. Her idea of a game is fighting. She references the world revolving multiple times and uses a knife to attack. By the way, I always thought it was weird that Jevil's weapon is called the Devil's Knife, despite clearly being a scythe, but now I think it's literally just to make this connection stronger. If Aqua is connected to Jevil in personality, then Kris probably is too, while dialed down quite a bit. That's cool and all, but if we're being honest, this isn't enough of a connection to prove this theory. But let me cook here for a minute. Jevil has the most explicit reference to freedom out of all of the secret bosses. But instead of wanting freedom, like a certain salesman and presumably Kris, he believes he's already found it, separated from the rest of the world in his own personal freedom, while everyone else is trapped outside. Kris clearly doesn't feel very free. They're trapped with the soul, trapped in whatever promise they made with the voice on the phone, and a number of other things we'll get to later. So instead, let's look at the reason Jevil thinks he's free. A mysterious stranger told him something about his world, and Jevil now believes
I can do anything.
Not only because of his newfound power, but because his choices don't matter. Before Chapter 3 and 4, I thought the knowledge he received was that he was a Darkener, that his world was an illusion. But now it's pretty clear that that's common knowledge. King implies that Jevil has some knowledge of the prophecy, somehow knowing about the night long before they showed up in Card Kingdom. If I had to guess, this is what drove him insane. Knowing that no matter what he did, the same result would happen. That his choices don't matter. So might as well have some fun. Sham tells us that after what Jevil told him, his view of the world grew darker yet darker. Somehow, they know what the next secret boss will be every time, and also give us some very cryptic advice that seems to be relating to the future. With all that in mind, I think it's very likely that Jevil knows the entire prophecy. Everyone else around him was still locked on their path set in glass without even realizing it, and he is the only one that's truly free, knowing that his life is just a game, essentially. Kris knows about the prophecy as well. After attending church their whole life, even if they were sleeping through it sometimes, it would be hard not to get a little information about Hometown's understanding of the legend. And since Kris works with the Knight, who most likely knows about the entire prophecy, at the very least since they opened the church's dark world, I believe Kris has a pretty good understanding of it. If something in the prophecy says that Kris must work with the Knight, maybe that's why they do it. Or perhaps they believe that helping the Knight will stop the final tragedy in some way. Maybe they feel guilty about their role in something in the prophecy. It's too early to know for sure, but what's certain is that this knowledge has to be pretty heavy for a regular teenager to carry around. It clearly affects Susie at the end of Chapter 4, and it has clearly taken its toll on Kris. Before the events of the game, Kris doesn't have many friends, and the few they do have clearly grown distant. Their brother, their only true friend as Asgore puts it, is at college. The only people that seem to know what Kris is dealing with are the Knight and Carol. And let's be honest, neither of them seem to be very compassionate. In other words, Kris feels very alone because of the burden of the prophecy. Hey, wait a minute. What's literally the first thing that Jevil tells us?
So lonely I be.
And later,
They lost the chase and locked up their entire race. Now I am the only one who's free.
sounds like you don't need any help.
That is unso. I grow lonely in my little freedom.
Jevil is alone. Because of his burdensome knowledge, he lost all of his companions, including his closest friend. And Kris feels the same way. Two people who lost what they once had because they knew too much. And because they tried to kill someone, but we'll get to that. Those are all of the parallels I could find. As for what we can learn about Deltarune's story based on these connections, Sham, Jevil's closest friend, was the one who trapped Jevil. I think it's entirely possible that Azrael had something to do with Kris getting trapped with the player. It seems like Azrael's going to be coming home in Chapter 6, so maybe we'll learn more then. Speaking of the next chapter, the big shot himself. Spamton is one of my favorite characters in Deltarune. He's funny, has an amazing theme, and has some really interesting relationships with the rest of the game's characters, including Kris. Like I mentioned in the intro to Jevil's segment, the parallels between these two are pretty obvious. Specifically, Spamton's want of freedom and inability to obtain it. In the same way that Spamton can't fly without his strings, Kris can't survive without the soul, the very thing keeping them trapped. Kris clearly recognizes this, as they are pretty rattled after the fight with Spamton Neo. When asked by Susie if they're okay, they can't even respond by themselves. Spamton's heart chain attack and the dialogue that happens during it are references to Kris being chained to the soul.
Kris, take the deal. Take it. Do you want to be a
Heart
chain your whole life?
In Spamton's opening monologue, he says a bunch of stuff that applies to him, but also seems to apply to Kris.
Well, have I got a
Special deal.
for lonely hearts like you? If you've
Lost control of your life.
then you just gotta grab it by the silly string. Why be the
Little sponge.
who hates its $4.99 life when you can be a
Big shot.
In a very similar manner to Jevil, Spamton seems to have some knowledge about the future. He somehow knows something about the night, and would have told us what it was if Kris hadn't threatened him. Since both Jevil and Spamton were reached out to by a mysterious stranger, I think it's pretty safe to say that Spamton's benefactor is the same person who gave Jevil his knowledge. Maybe Spamton doesn't know everything, but he does know something, enough for Kris to be scared of him revealing something about the night. If Jevil's response to knowing about the prophecy was to go insane, Spamton seems to have capitalized on it. He used the information the person on the phone gave him for his own benefit, to great success. In a similar way, Kris has their own phone person, and is using the knowledge that they give them to further their plans, whatever those may be. I'm not completely certain about this, but I do think there's a pretty decent chance that the person talking to Kris on the phone is the same person who spoke to Spamton. But don't quote me on that. I still think it's most likely the Knight or maybe Carol. But then again, both Spamton and Kris's phone make the same noise. Speaking of theories, what kinds of predictions can we make about Kris's story based on what we know about Spamton? Well, Spamton tries to do everything he can to be a big shot. He makes a deal with the phone guy to help him get more sales. When that stops working, he tries to get the Neo body to become stronger. When that doesn't work out the way he wanted, he sets his sights on the soul. Obviously, he fails, but for some reason he seems to think that attaining the soul will fix his problems. If he had somehow managed to get it, I think it would have just let us control Spamton. Despite thinking it would set him free, it would have just made things worse. I wonder if Kris was in a very similar situation. They thought that getting linked with us would fix some sort of problem they had. But in the end, we just complicated things. We don't have enough information about Kris's backstory to figure this out yet, but I think that this is entirely possible. I know it's not exactly a groundbreaking theory, but I do think it could have some interesting implications for the plot. Why would anyone ever choose to be trapped with someone else controlling them? That doesn't sound like fun at all. Unless you could blame all your problems on that someone. Unless they let you do things you would never have the courage to do yourself. Unless...
Do you honestly think it will get you what you want? No. Part of you is just enjoying this, isn't it? The same part of you that enjoyed yesterday, knowing you could say it wasn't really you.
Of all of Deltarune's mysteries, this thing is the most intriguing to me. What the heck is this guy? Or girl? Or chicken nugget? We know almost nothing about it. Lots of people call it ERAM, but we don't even technically know if it has a name. Thanks to the new Pink dialogue, it's kind of implied that this thing is the mysterious stranger involved with all of the other secret bosses, since it has a pack of cats it uses during its fight. That's still speculation and not the point of this video. But the few things we do know are very, very interesting. First off, it apparently has a pre-existing relationship with Kris. Before its fight, the first thing it does is call Kris by name. And even though it has very little dialogue, we can learn a lot about Kris from what it says. But first, let's talk about parallels. Besides already knowing Kris, there isn't a lot to go off of here. I think that's because it's not meant to be the main secret boss of this chapter, just a step to get to it. I wanted to talk about it because there's still a lot of Kris information here. But there is one big thing connecting them. It is said repeatedly throughout the game that when they were younger, Kris would wear a red headband with horns as a way to blend in with the rest of their family. What's the one defining feature of the Shadow Mantle boss? It's devil horns. I've seen this theory a few times, but I wonder if this thing is the Darkner version of that headband. Toriel does say it's missing, but that's boring stuff. Let's have some real fun. As you heard at the beginning of this segment, the Shadow Mantle implies that Kris is enjoying the thrill of fighting the secret bosses, and of going through the genocide-like Mantle game. If you do the weird route, it also says that part of Kris enjoyed that too. Kris reacts poorly to this either way, but by the end of the fight, the boss says,
There, that's what I wanted to see. Flickering red like pretty little flames. Your eyes can't hide it, Kris. Without play, the knife grows dull.
No matter how much they try to hide it, Kris does enjoy the violence of these fights. In order for a knife to grow dull, it would have needed to be sharp in the first place. This is strengthened by the Chapter 4 egg room. This one NPC, who we also know nothing about, says,
Are you here for art club? Right, this is where we draw pictures and don't kill each other.
When you leave the room, the blue Rudin says,
They say art is therapeutic.
This implies that Kris may have gone to art therapy to deal with violent tendencies in the past. If that one NPC is to be believed, Kris may have even attempted to hurt or kill someone in the past. All of this is yet another connection to Jevil, who also doesn't have the most healthy relationship with violence. One last thing about this guy. When you first meet it in the second Mantle game, after you pick up the shelter key, it says,
Oh, you found that too? Perfect. Just perfect. Thanks for all your hard work, Kris.
implying that somehow what Kris is doing is helping it in some way. After the fight, it says,
Well, enough of that. We both have work to do.
Coming back to what I said about Kris's phone call being from the mysterious stranger and the pink dialogue referencing the owner of Image Friend, I really do wonder if this guy is the mastermind behind Kris, Carol, the Knight, and whoever else's plan. It already knows Kris, it implies that Kris is doing something for it, and you find it when you enter the shelter inside the Mantle game. Could the real, ungamified version of it be waiting for us in the shelter? We'll just have to find out in future chapters. After all, we haven't truly fought this guy as a real secret boss. That title is reserved for... the Knight. My personal favorite of all of the secret boss fights. Unfortunately, at this point in the story, we don't know very much about this character. Everything about them is surrounded in mystery. What we know for certain is that they're trying to cause the Roaring, according to their name at the very least. They're also trying to kidnap people, and don't seem to be very picky about who they're taking. Apparently, Toriel and Undyne are interchangeable. And, biggest thing of all, they're working with Kris. This isn't a parallel exactly, but it is an important aspect of Kris's character. And that's about it. For the purposes of this video, that's not great. No dialogue, no hidden text about the Knight's love of pie, nothing. Oh well, guess the theory's over. Except that there actually is a really big connection here. Look at Kris here. Now look at the Knight. Now look at Kris. Now look at the Knight. Now look at Kris, and now look at the Knight. There are a bunch of different examples of Kris and the Knight striking very similar, if not the same, poses. It makes sense that for a character that doesn't speak, we have to look at their mannerisms to find Kris parallels. What does this tell us about Kris? Well, whoever the Knight is, it's clearly someone Kris respects, looks up to, or is close to in some way. They kinda have to be if they're imitating them, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. Or I guess it could be vice versa, but since the Knight seems to be the superior in this relationship, I find that hard to believe. I could probably talk for an hour about who I think the Knight is. It's 100% Des, by the way. But I don't want this to turn into a Who is the Knight video. But I do think Kris really related to Des and saw her as a role model. When whatever happened to Des happened, it makes sense that Kris would want to help her or trust her enough to see her plan through. In addition, thanks to Asgore's monologue, where we hear the Thorn Ring equip noise, I think there's definitely some correlation between Des and the Weird Root. Potentially what's happening to Noelle, and by extension Kris, is what happened to Des in the past. But I'm just speculating here. And that's really all I've got on the Knight. We know so little about this character, but I'm certain that we will find more connections to Kris as the game goes on. Now let's talk about... I'm old or something, roll laugh track. Just like most of the other secret bosses, Gerson has a pretty in-depth understanding of the prophecy. Not only did he write an entire book series based on it, he also hints that he knows more than the average hometown resident, with lines like, "Can't think I'm gonna be the toughest thing you'll face," foreshadowing the Titan, and constantly giving directions to the places the heroes need to go, somehow knowing exactly where they need to be heading. Again, this is most likely a Kris parallel. But what is Gerson's response to this knowledge? Instead of accepting it as fact, he believes that the prophecy isn't as concrete as it seems.
Well, we were following that prophecy so closely, I couldn't quite see where I was going. just think those words shine a bit too bright. A path so blue, it's all you can see. So I say, why don't we go between the lines? It's darker there.
That last line specifically is fascinating. When in the final prophecy room, if you use the shadow crystal, it says, "You held the crystal up to your eye. For some strange reason, the prophecy's text did not warp in the crystal's lens. You shook the crystal. However, nothing changed." Kris shakes the crystal after nothing happens, almost as if it was broken and they were expecting something different. Going back to the Shadow Mantle boss, the line,
That's why you're searching for them, aren't you? The shadow crystals and the shadow mantle that I'm holding. Do you honestly think it will get you what you want?
According to Susie, Kris obviously doesn't want the final prophecy to happen. Granted, Susie also doesn't know Kris is working with the Knight, but let's just assume that it's true. Does Kris believe that getting the shadow crystals will help subvert the final tragedy? Well, Gerson specifically says that it's darker between the lines. Shadows are a form of darkness. Whatever the shadow crystal questline is heading towards, Kris does seem to think that the crystals will help with something related to the final tragedy. If you don't know about the pure crystal, I recommend looking it up because I don't want to spend forever explaining it. But basically, if the pure crystal is the item we get from collecting all the shadow crystals, we know it can be used to craft a very powerful weapon. I would be surprised if the twisted sword is the only thing we can use it for. I've seen a few people say that maybe we can use it to improve previous items we received from secret bosses. If so, that would make us a lot stronger. Maybe Kris believes that if we're strong enough, we can subvert the final tragedy. It would be an interesting plot point because Ralsei believes the opposite. All of this is to say that Kris seems to believe that something about the prophecy can change, the same way Gerson believes that stories can be retold. And if the shadow crystals are related to this change, Gerson could be hinting at that. None of the things that happen related to the shadow crystals are in the prophecy as far as we know, which makes sense since it's optional content. But that would also make them in between the lines, not truly written in stone, so maybe they can be used to carve a new path. Other than this, I couldn't really find any other parallels. Maybe there's something I missed. If you have any other ideas, I'd love to hear them in the comments. But as for the next one, someone needs to get Undyne out of the shelter to tell her that anime is real, baby! I don't mean to brag, but I beat this fight on the 3rd try. The Knight took me like 30 tries, so I felt like that was pretty cool. Like I said at the very beginning of the video, the parallels here are super obvious. First off, Pink is actually 2 separate entities, just like Kris and the soul. The one possessing the body wants to control it, and gets mad when they don't do exactly what they want. The body has different goals to the host as well, but they both still need each other at the end of the day. I wonder what that could mean. But the interesting thing is that at the end of the plotline, both the ghost and the doll have come to an agreement, and are managing to make it work. I think it's extremely likely that in a future chapter, probably chapter 7 or maybe at the end of 6, we will figure something out with Kris so that we can work together to save the world. Our goal for the game is to save the characters we've come to love over the course of the story, and despite having a very different way of going about it, I think Kris wants that too. If we can figure something out, we would be much stronger if we work together. But before we get to that point, we are most likely going to have a fight of some kind, and we may end up getting a Kris boss fight. I've been predicting that since chapter 3 and 4 came out, and it would be super cool to see. But yeah, the connection was super obvious and clear cut for this one. I guess the video's done. I mean, there are only 5 chapters out so far. What else is there to talk? Yeah, okay, that was a stupid joke. Despite Sham telling us that Pink was the final shadow crystal, I would be very surprised if this was the final secret boss. I would understand if there was no secret boss in chapter 7, but it would be weird to end the plotline with 2 chapters left. I think there are 3 possible people who could be chapter 6's fight. First, someone new. It's entirely possible that we have never met this character. But I do think it would be weird since Sham directly says there wouldn't be anyone else. But maybe this new character has nothing to do with shadow crystals. Another idea I haven't seen anyone talk about is the Blue Rudin from Castletown. This guy is clearly meant to be something. He knows the player's name, and people don't just randomly turn blue. Wait a second. That's a parallel to Kris that I haven't seen anywhere else. On top of that, there are still 2 more soul modes that should appear at some point during the rest of the game, and both of them happen to be a shade of blue. Since most of the secret bosses have used a unique soul mode, it would make sense for this character to have one. He knows stuff he shouldn't, and he speaks in weird riddles. He fits all the criteria. But while I do think this would be cool, I don't think it's super likely. Why would we fight him? Did he steal all the shadow crystals from Sham? Speaking of Sham, this is the character I think is most likely to be the final secret fight. Like we've been talking about through the whole video, Sham knows way too much. They also seem to be incredibly powerful. They were the one to trap Jevil, and in Chapter 5 they say that they challenged all the people from the Sanctuary to a sparring match and won in a landslide. They even ask you to recruit people who are stronger. In some concept art released by Toby, and in their official plush, Sham is seen holding a staff that we haven't seen anywhere else. It would make sense for them to use it in a fight. They tell you that the reward for obtaining all of the shadow crystals will be entertaining. This is the guy who's best friends with Jevil, by the way, and we all know what Jevil's idea of fun is. On top of all of that, the pure crystal description is the shadow purified by the cat. I can see interacting with them in Chapter 6 going something like this.
Ah, Kris, so you found the final shadow crystal. Incredible. When this whole journey began, I did not think you would be able to do it. Do not mistake me, I never doubted your abilities. But by all odds, it should not have been possible. You have proven yourself against things I would have never dared to challenge. I know. You are waiting for your reward. You see, if one acquires enough dreams, you could reshape them, purify them into something new. 6 were needed. You have given 5 of them, which leaves me to provide the last. But before I do, let me ask a favor. You've proven yourself stronger than I could have ever hoped. Kris, face me so I may see your strength with my own eyes. I know you will find it worth your while.
Sham knows the prophecy and has given up hope. But as you collect the shadow crystals, their faith is slowly restored. We can't say for certain what Kris is thinking, but if their goal is to collect the shadow crystals, I imagine they feel very similarly to Sham. Hopefully, the pure crystal is what both Kris and Sham are looking for. And with that, we've covered every secret boss. Lots of people have analyzed the secret bosses, their characters, and what we can learn from them. But I think there's a lot to be gained from looking at them in this unique way. Kris is one of the most interesting protagonists in any video game I've ever played, and I can't wait to learn more about them in these final 2 chapters of Deltarune. And if any of the predictions I made in this video end up happening, that would be pretty cool too. Thank you so much for watching. I have so much more I would love to say about this amazing game if people want to hear it. Please let me know if you do. Anyway, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.